All right, so here we are again. Now, of course, we're in the moment discussing perfect competition. We started it last time. Let me get those notes open real fast. Whoops, hold on. Okay, so we're looking at perfect competition, and so we got pretty far into it, actually. But just quickly to review what we had done. What we were seeing here is that with perfect competition, we have a large number of firms that are selling an identical product. And because of that, they're all charging the same price, okay? Because if they don't, they'll lose all their business to the other competitors. So here are the characteristics of perfect competition. Each firm is what we call a price taker. That means no firm has enough market power to set a price that's different from its competitors. Because charging a higher price than competing firms would cause the firm to lose all of its revenues, literally all of them. We're assuming that even if we raise our price by a penny, the other firms will take all of our business from us because people in the market know that our price is higher, and so they'll just switch to somebody else. We also don't need to lower our price, though, because we're all small firms. We can sell all of our output at the same market price as everyone else. So the net effect is that everyone charges the same price. The price is undifferentiated or identical. Otherwise, we're looking at a different market structure. If the products are different, like for example, with fast food, we know that McDonald's and Burger King sell very similar products, but they're not identical to each other. So therefore, that market is not considered to be perfect competition. And we're also assuming that there's a large number of very small firms. Each one is too small to affect prices with its own actions. So they all end up just basically charging the exact same price. There's no barriers to entry. In other words, anyone can jump into this business at a moment's notice. And in fact, this is what we would expect to see if there are profits being earned by these firms. And so anyone can say, I want to join that industry too. And all firms have access to all information. So you remember from the video we had last time where they were showing that in Idaho, no, it was Utah, right on the Idaho border, that little town where everybody offers raspberry shakes, could be thought of as a type of perfectly competitive market because they're all more or less the same. You have to assume that they're identical, although in the video, you can see that there might be a few slight variations, like maybe one of them had a twist of lime in it or that kind of thing. But for all practical purposes, all the raspberry shakes were the same. They all were charging the same price. Although, again, it was a little bit different because some of them had slightly different sizes. But for all practical purposes, the price per ounce would be the same. And it's except for the cups themselves, the product would be identical in each case. And we saw that in that town that they were talking about, just about everybody was offering raspberry shakes as one of their many offerings. So the industry could be considered all the small restaurants and cafes and all the rest that were offering raspberry smoothie shakes. And anybody, literally anyone, could jump into this business. Anyone who owned a machine that can let you make shakes could jump into this business and make their own raspberry shakes. So it would be simple to add this to your existing offerings if you're a restaurant or a diner or whatever the case may be. So if it seems that raspberry shakes are profitable, anyone could add that as an offering. And so it's easy to get into and out of this industry. And of course, it's a small town. Everybody can see what everybody else is doing. All the signs are out there to show you how much these raspberry shakes cost. So we all know what everybody else is doing. All the customers know who's got the shakes and who doesn't. So it's a type of perfectly competitive market. And the implication of this is the horizontal demand curve, something that's very unusual. Um, like here, for example, you see the curve is flat. Why is it flat? Because in this example, with a $10 price, every unit that we sell, we will charge $10 from the customers. So therefore, every unit brings in an extra $10. And that means that the marginal revenue from each item that we sell is $10. The demand curve is flat, which means that it has an infinite price elasticity of demand. This is one of the very unusual features of a perfectly competitive firm. You don't see this with the other market structures, that's for sure. Now, we also saw that this demand curve is the demand curve for a single perfectly competitive firm. And here, though, what we're seeing is that in the market as a whole, for the entire market for raspberry shakes, we have the traditional supply and demand curves. The demand curve is downward sloping because if all raspberry shakes, I keep saying smoothies, it was shakes in the video, all of them are competing for customers with other types of drinks that the customers could possibly buy. So if the raspberry shakes become too expensive, people will switch to other types of drinks. So the entire market for raspberry shakes does have competition from other types of drinks that people could potentially buy. So because of that, the demand curve for the entire industry has its traditional downward sloping shape that we're used to seeing. And so at the intersection of the supply and demand curves for the entire industry, that is what's determining the price that each individual firm sells. So you can see here that the original equilibrium price was $10. Okay, $10 was the intersection of the original supply and demand curves, and that's why all the firms were individually charging $10. But then if the supply curve increases because more firms jump into the business, then the new equilibrium price drops to $8. And now everybody in the market has to lower their price to $8. Again, if they don't, they'll lose all their revenues. So what we charge as individual firms depends on the marketplace for that product. If the supply changes, in particular, if more companies start offering the raspberry shakes, then we see that the price will drop. If it drops far enough, eventually some of these businesses will disappear. They can't keep lowering their price forever and still survive. So we'll get into that more later on, but you can see that the price that the individual firm is charging ultimately comes from the entire market for that product. All right. And then finally, we need to define this incredibly important concept called marginal revenue. Marginal revenue simply means the change in total revenue divided by the change in quantity produced or sold. So we'll just call it change in quantity. So basically, this tells me how much extra revenue we receive from selling one more unit of the product. That's what it actually means. If I sell one more unit of this product, how much extra revenue do I bring in? And with a flat demand curve, of course, this is a constant, but we'll see in the later chapters, in most cases, it is not a constant. And it turns out to be an incredibly important factor in determining how many units we should sell, okay? Because ultimately, what we want to know is how much should we sell to maximize our profits? And we'll see this is an important detail in determining how do we maximize our profits. Now up here, just for comparison, we have the marginal cost, which is very similar, except that here we have the change in total costs divided by the change in output. It's still the ratio of one change to the other. The difference is that in the numerator, refers to the change in costs of production as opposed to down here where it's the change in total revenue. Now, here's one of the most important results that you'll see in economics. It turns out that if we want to maximize our profits, what we have to do is produce where these two are equal to each other. In other words, this is the profit maximizing output for all firms, whether they're perfectly competitive or not. Okay, this is it right here. Profit maximizing output always occurs at the point where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. And we're going to prove it later on in this chapter. Okay, so, and what this means is that the extra revenue from selling one more unit of the good equals the additional or extra cost of producing it. So in other words, we're going to reach the point where I'm going to produce, let's say that it costs $5 each to make the raspberry shakes. That means I want to sell them at the point where I want to charge $5 each. And that's exactly what's going to happen in perfect competition. All right. And of course, down here, we remind ourselves that the reason why the demand curve is horizontal is because the marginal revenue is a constant and it's equal to P. So if you look at that curve all along the entire curve, nothing changes. The demand is the same as the price, which equals marginal revenue. So if, for example, if we charge $10 per unit of our good, then we we receive $10 from each additional unit, and therefore the marginal revenue must be 10. Okay, so that's the important stuff right there. D equals P equals MR, flat demand curve, but that price in turn is determined in the market for that good. We don't choose this ourselves. This comes from the market supply and demand curves. Okay, and of course, we've already seen this. The demand curve for the entire industry has its traditional downward sloping shape. And that's because for the industry as a whole, consumers may substitute goods produced by other industries. In other words, if we overprice our raspberry shakes, maybe people will switch over to chocolate shakes or something completely different that we're not selling. And so for the market as a whole, or the industry as a whole, we do have competition from other possible goods. Therefore, in order to sell more, or in order for the entire industry or market to sell more units of the good, the price must be lowered. Okay, but that's for the entire industry. The single firm, it doesn't work this way, as we've seen. Everybody chooses the price that coincides with the interaction of the market supply and demand curves. All right, so let me just quickly put that in there one more time. Whatever price this is, that's what the individual firms will charge. All right, so this is the market, and this is the firm. Now, what's missing from all these diagrams is the cost curves that we analyzed in an earlier chapter. So the cost curves need to be combined with this information in order for us to determine where or how many units of the output we should be producing. So let me just quickly remind you what these cost curves look like. Let's see. I'll just sneak in a little graph here. The cost curves that we analyze, which by the way, are the same for all industries. This is true whether we're a perfectly competitive firm. This is true whether we're a monopoly. The price is here, the cost is here. Actually, usually on the vertical axis, we just have dollars because this isn't really a demand curve. The cost curves that we really need are basically the average total cost curve, the average variable cost curve, and the marginal cost curve. In order to finally determine, which is what we're ultimately interested in, where should we produce, how many units of this good should we sell, we need to take into account both the demand curve that we face as well as these cost curves. And also just a quick reminder, the marginal cost curve cuts through these at their minimum values. So the combination of these cost curves and the demand curve will enable us to determine where our profit maximizing output will be. And of course, obviously as a profit maximizing company, that's what we want to know. How much should we sell? I mean, we're selling raspberry smoothies. Should we sell 8 of them? Should we sell 10? Should we sell 20? That's a good question. And ultimately, it comes down to these cost curves because remember, we do have to worry about diminishing returns. This is true regardless of the type of market we're in. So the shape of these curves ultimately comes down to diminishing returns. At first, remember, output grows very quickly. And while it does, costs will fall very quickly. Then output grows much more slowly, and therefore costs start to rise. So we have to take all this into account ultimately when we decide where to produce our product or how much. All right, now with all that background, now we've already seen a couple of videos, but I have a couple more here that I think you should see because I think they're very helpful in providing more background for what we're doing here. So I just want to make sure we haven't forgotten any of these key details before you watch the videos, because then they will make a lot more sense. And then we also have some videos here, which I've found, which try to explain how this works in the real world. A lot of times in economics, we have a tendency to focus on theory, and it's easy to forget about the real world. So I did find a series of videos that we'll be watching, if not today, certainly next week, which try to tie all this together with what actually happens in the real world, which I think you'll find very interesting. Anyway, so the first video I'd like to show you today is right here. All right, let's just take a look at this, and it'll hopefully tie together everything we've been doing to get a fuller picture of how perfect competition actually works. All right, let's check this out.
Grammarly can help you write quickly and confidently. Emails, documents, and more without having to stay put.
Mm. Okay, are we done? So they mentioned, I didn't even realize this was out here, that there's a separate video which explains exactly why MR equals MC is our profit maximizing output. So I think we should check it out because I like that video. I thought it was very well done, and I like the graphs, especially. They made it very, very clear what we're supposed to be focusing on. And so, but what's still left unaddressed is the exact reasoning behind why MR equals MC is, in fact, our profit maximizing output. So, why don't we check this out? Hold on 1 second. Let me fire this off to you. And then later on we'll go back and go over it again because obviously the video did a good job. We have to take a step back and really explain it in much more detail. All right, let's check this out. Well, that was very complicated. I agree with you. So don't worry, we'll go over that in much more detail later on. But this way, at least you're starting to get a feel for why this is happening, because basically it means that if you're not producing where MR equals MC, you could do better. That's really all that it means. It means you're not at the right spot. And so it's like anything else. You want to get the maximum out of all of your resources. So if you're running a business, you always want to maximize your profits. And so, like they said in the earlier video, you don't control how much you can sell to your customers, but you do control how many units that you can produce. And you do have other controls over, let's say, your costs. So you want to be the one who decides how much should I sell based on the relationship between MR equals MC. So now I have one more video, which is just about perfect competition. Let's take a quick look at this one. By the time we're done, you'll be experts on perfect competition. All right, let's check this out. Okay, are we done? All right, all right, anyway, I guess we'll get back to it. Hold on a second. So anyway, so what we want to do is get back to this discussion about the costs of production and how do we maximize our profits for a perfectly competitive firm. So we know already, we've been told several times that MR equals MC is where we want to produce our maximize our profits. So the question is why? All right. So probably the best way to do that is to draw a picture where we bring them together, everything together in one place. Let me see what I can do here. Hold on 1 second. All right. All right. So we have our traditional horizontal demand curve. And then we have our cost curve. So let's do it this way. Well, actually, for this, we really only need the marginal cost curve. Let's do that. Okay, so there's your Q star. Now, the question is, why do we want to produce here? All right, suppose that we picked Q1 to produce that. And let's say instead we also produce Q2. What we're going to do is demonstrate why neither one of these represents profit maximizing output. So if we pick Q1, what we notice about Q1 is that MR is greater than MC. You can tell because the curve is above the marginal cost curve. Whereas here at Q2, it's the other way around. So why is that not the best possible output here? All right, well, let's do these one at a time. Why is Q1, where MR is greater than MC, not the profit maximizing output? All right, well, because when you think about it, if MR is greater than MC, then what this means is that producing one more unit increases total revenues more than total costs. Okay, in other words, remember what MR actually means. MR is, I'll remind you down here, is the change in total revenue divided by the change in total cost. The change in total revenue divided by the change in output. Marginal cost equals the change in total cost over the change in total quantity. So when MR is greater than MC, if I produce one more unit, The marginal revenue, that means that I'm getting, let's say, to make up some numbers, suppose that MR is 10 and MC is 8, just to give it some actual numbers. That means if I make one more unit, I'll get $10 more worth of revenues, and it will only cost me $8 to produce this product. So therefore, I want to produce at least one more unit, because that extra unit is bringing me more revenues than costs. All right, so now that may not be the case much longer, but what that means is I need to move in this direction towards Q star, because it's saying that if I add, and you can see from the vertical distance on this curve, this is the gap between the two. Every time I add more output, MR remains above MC, although they're getting closer to each other. Every time I increase the output in this range, I'm getting more extra revenue than more extra cost. That will stop when I reach this point. When if I go past this point, the opposite will happen. So with these bars here, MR exceeds MC. On this side of the fence, though, it's the other way around. In this range, MR is less than MC. So when that happens, if MR is less than MC, so let's say that let's say this is 6 and this is 8. That means that selling one less unit of the good will reduce total costs by $8, but will reduce total revenues by only $6. That means that's the right move. Okay, so if I'm in this range where MR is greater than MC, I'm overproducing this product. In this range, and so that means I want to move back in this direction. In this area down here, I am underproducing the product. And therefore, I want to make more. So the idea is that when you're underproducing, adding more output adds more to your revenues than your costs. When you're overproducing like this, cutting back reduces your costs more than your revenues. So that means that no matter where you are, the only place where you can possibly be maximizing your profits is to be right here where the two are exactly the same. So I don't know, I hope that made sense. But yes, the whole idea here is that MR needs to equal MC in order for us to maximize our profits. So with that being said, what we'd like to be able to do is take a look at some of these cost curves and figure out what kind of profits we're making at different situations. Like here, for example, I brought together all the cost curves and the demand curve when the price is 5 and the quantity is 90. And if you notice at this point, not only does MR equal MC, but if you also notice, the price equals the average total cost. Okay, now what does that have to do with anything? All right, well, this is an important concept in economics. This point is sometimes called the break-even point, or it's also known as zero economic profit. Now, it sounds like we're not making any money here, but in reality, Zero economic profit doesn't literally mean no profits. And let's explain now why. So in order to do that, we have to take a step back and remind ourselves of the distinction between what we call accounting profit and economic profit. So accounting profit equals total revenues minus total explicit costs, whereas economic profit equals total revenues minus total explicit costs minus opportunity costs. So in other words, this is equivalent to saying economic profit equals accounting profit minus opportunity costs. So the idea here is that when the price equals average total cost, we are earning zero economic profits okay, which doesn't mean zero accounting profits, though. That's the bottom line. What it means is that we are earning enough money with zero economic profits. We are earning enough revenues to cover our explicit costs and our opportunity costs. Okay, so this means that we're said to be breaking even, but let me show you an example which illustrates why this doesn't mean you're making no profits at all. It means you're covering your opportunity costs. So let's say that a lawyer quits his job to start up his own firm. He was earning $300,000 a year, and now he's decided to start up his own practice. So the first year of practice, he earns $1 million worth of revenues, but his explicit costs on things like rent and salaries and equipment and all the rest is $700,000. So an accountant would say, nice job, you've earned a $300,000 profit. On paper, that's exactly what's happened. But the economist would say, well, that's not quite as good as it sounds, because you did sacrifice that $300,000 job in order to start up this business. So as far as I'm concerned, you have exactly broken even. In other words, all you're doing is making enough profit to compensate you for the salary you sacrificed by quitting your job. So this means that the economist would say that the lawyer is making zero economic profit or breaking even. And it's because he's exactly covering his opportunity costs. So the lawyer is happy. I mean, he's making $300,000 and he's self-employed. But when you say things like zero economic profit or breaking even, it sounds like he's not making any money at all. That's not how it is. It just means that he's exactly covering his opportunity costs. And that means he has no incentive to go back to his old job. If his economic profit was negative, on the other hand, like for example, what if his economic, let me add that as a separate example here. Suppose that instead, let's look at a counterexample here. Suppose that the lawyer, oh, that's okay. Suppose the lawyer quits his job, but now this time his explicit costs are $800,000. So the accounting profit would be only $200,000, but look at this, the economic profit would actually be negative $100,000. So even though in principle he is making $200,000, an economist would say that he made a terrible mistake because he's actually losing compared to what he had before. He's not covering his opportunity costs. So he's actually worse off working for himself than he was working for the law firm. This would be considered an economic loss. And now, of course, the lawyer may say, I don't care. I like working for myself. This is fine. But we have to be aware of the fact that he is actually, in purely economic terms, worse off than he was before. And in fact, he might even think about going back to the law firm if, that's all he cares about is the profits. So here, though, he's breaking even. He's got the same opportunity, same salary that he had before, and so he's happy. So with the profits of a perfectly competitive firm, breaking even means that my opportunity costs are covered. And so therefore, I'm probably making a positive accounting profit, and I'm also covering my opportunity costs. So this is fine. There's no problem here. In fact, we expect that in the long run, all perfectly competitive firms will be exactly at this point. Otherwise, competition will ensure that that's the case. In other words, what happens if instead of this graph, let's see. Oh man, look at all these. Look how crowded this is getting. Let me show you what would happen if, in this example, the price went up. Let's say the price goes up to $6. All right, so I'll tell you what, let me keep this graph and just show you so they're all on the same graph. What happens if the price goes up? Okay, let's try that again. I want you to see everything together in one place. All right, so let's just assume now that for some reason, the demand for this product gets stronger and the price goes up in the market to $6. So now D equals P equals MR at $6. And where does MR equals MC? Right here. And so now we're producing 100 units of this product. And the most important detail now, let me see if I can squeeze this in here, is that the gap between what we're charging for this product and the average total cost is positive. So this green box represents positive economic profits. Okay, so let's say, for example, at this point, ATC is $5.25. So our profits equal the difference between the price and the ATC times the number of units we're selling, and that works out to be $75. And this is positive economic profit. This is fantastic news for the perfectly competitive firm because normally they expect to break even. Now they're not only covering their opportunity costs, they're actually making even more money than that. So it would be like the lawyer suddenly finding himself, where's the lawyer example? Here it is. Let's try this as a third case of this lawyer example. This time, let's say his explicit costs are only $600,000, then his accounting profit is $400,000. And that means his economic profit is actually positive $300,000. $100,000. So his accounting profit is $400,000, but his economic profit is $100,000. So not only is he covering the salary that he gave up from his old job, he's making another $100,000 on top of that. So he's really excited now. not only is he self-employed, but he has even more money than he did before. So while the accounting profit is 400,000, the economic profit is 100,000. Now, if this is a highly competitive market and the word gets around that he's making money, other lawyers might join into this business, and soon enough, the profits would probably shrink, and you would expect that in the long run, if there's enough competition, that he'll be back to breaking even. If it's a perfectly competitive market, or at least a highly competitive market. So over time, we would expect, in the long run at least, if this type of thing happens, if a firm, in a perfectly competitive firm, I should say, is making positive economic profits, then other firms will join the industry and prices will fall until the existing firms are breaking even again. That's what we expect to happen in the long run. Okay, we have more competition. So let's see how that would work with the market supply and demand curves. So we started out here, let's say, and originally we were at $5. Yes, $5. Okay, so let's say that here's the market, and here's the the individual firm. And so initially we're at $5. And we were breaking even. Then when the price went up to 6, we were happy for a while because suddenly we're making profits. So normally what we would expect to happen then is that the supply curve will jump up. Yes, supply will increase because everybody out there in the market who potentially could join into this industry says, I see that they're making profits in this industry. Therefore, I want to be part of that. And so more firms will jump in, and before you know it, the supply curve shifts to the right, and we're back to $5. Wait a minute, sorry. Oh, you know what I forgot to include here? The reason why the price went up to $6 is because the demand curve went up. Yeah, I left that out. Sorry, hold on a second. Yeah, that's not going to happen by itself. We need an increase in demand to move the price up to 6. But once we get here, that's when the price people start to notice, hey, wait a minute, there's profits to be had in this industry. Let's call that point 1 and point 2. And this is demand curve 1, and this is demand curve 2. So then everybody sees this and says, I could be getting part of that myself. So therefore, why don't I join this industry, whatever it is? Let's say it's raspberry shakes again. Why don't I offer raspberry shakes since they're so profitable? And so before you know it, the supply curve is shifting to the right. And before you know it, we're back to $5 again. And so everybody's breaking even once more. So this is actually, I guess this is green and black. We started out at 5, where we were breaking even. Then the price went up to 6, where we were making profits. Other firms jumped in the industry, the supply curve shifts again, and before you know it, we're back to $5. So in the long run, the bottom line here is that in the long run, firms will break even, which means earn 0 economic profit. They may go through short periods where they're making more money than usual, but eventually competition will ensure that that doesn't last. Okay. All right. So that's what's happening. Now, the opposite can happen too. If for some reason the price drops, let's say we go through the opposite experience. Let's say we start at 5. Okay, so this is the original supply and demand curves. We started with a price of 5, where we're breaking even. And that's fine. But then all of a sudden, the demand for the product declines, and suddenly the price drops. To $4, let's say. Oh, that's bad news. Because look where we are now. Actually, I didn't draw this as well as I could have. Hold on one second. Yeah, let's see, where are we? Yes, this is the new price curve. So at $4, we'll be here. Okay, this is the new MR curve. MR equals MC. And so we're producing less of this product, but our price is well below the average total cost curve. So we're losing money now. And so what'll happen is several of these firms will drop out of the business because they're losing money. And so, you know what that means? The supply curve will shift to the left until, once again, we're back to $5. And then everybody's breaking even again. So in the long run, as we said before, firms will drop out when there are losses. And therefore, the supply curve will shift to the left until we'll get back to where we were. And then everybody's breaking even again, although there are fewer firms than there were before. Okay, so the long run is very different than the short run. In the short run, we assume that we could be suffering losses or making profits, but in the long run, we have time for all these adjustments to take place, so that we should expect everyone to be right back to breaking even. If profits are being made, more firms jump in. If losses are occurring, then companies will leave until we find ourselves breaking even again. Okay, so that's the big picture with perfect competition. So now, what we have now, it's getting a little late right now, but what we have next is like I said, I have a series of these videos that were intended to show us how market competition works in the real world. So I think before we go into the next topic, I think what we should probably do is watch some of these videos to get a better feel for how market structures, first of all, what different market structures are there? How are they different? And how can you identify them? And then how do firms behave within each of these markets? So I guess we can stop right here, especially since it's kind of a holiday here. But we'll pick it up again next Tuesday, and we'll wrap up our discussion about perfect competition. And then at the same time, what we'll also do is start introducing more discussion about the other market structures, as well as watch some of these videos about how this all works in the real world. So it should be very interesting. And we'll, of course, you can see we're getting a lot of graphing practice here. So we'll go back and revisit what we just did here, just to make sure everybody really understands what we've done. And then we'll carry on from there. All right. So I hope you all have a good Easter, and I'll see you all next Tuesday.
Thank you.
Okay. See you later. Bye.